There is an excess of both psychopathic and narcissistic tendencies in those who congregate around power. The difficulty with having developed a technology which enables them effectively to enslave the people is that they will do.
They are connected to a gigantic complex of computers.
Of course, the COVID situation has accelerated this in a number of ways. The mobile phone somehow become a passport to being a full citizen, and that your rights as a citizen are controlled by things that you must carry on a phone, and you must have a pass, and it can track where you are, and this is reported, and so on. And at the higher level, you're being monitored, your movements and your health status, in a way that we would never have accepted a few years ago. So one of the very important messages for me is we must, all of us, fight back. So we must not rest until all the emergency procedures and rules and regulations that were brought in the early days of COVID are repealed.
Hello everybody, got a stack of books here. One of my favorites, The Master and His Emissary, Iain McGilchrist. This one's pretty big. The Matter with Things, 2 volumes in hardcover, and Dr. McGilchrist published that through Perspectiva last November 9th actually, Owen Barfield's birthday. I wonder if that was intentional. Anyway, Dr. Iain McGilchrist is a former psychologist, student of the arts, neuroscientist, and author and public intellectual who has made a name for himself over the past decade plus, promoting an idea or vision of the world through the lens of how our brains work, our divided brains. There's plenty of material on that, but the recent book, The Matter with Things, delves into epistemology and science and philosophy, and concludes with an argument for the spiritual, or at least an appreciation thereof. Nonetheless, I've been keeping an eye on what Dr. McGilchrist has been up to, and I've paid attention to a few other people over in the UK, some intellectual writers, authors, thinkers. One of them is Mark Vernon. He has become well known over the past couple of years for his dialogues with fringe scientist Rupert Sheldrake.
What a deep thinker, Jason.
Yes.
Deep thinker.
Now, Dr. Sheldrake has been putting forth these ideas about morphic resonance in the morphogenetic field for over 40 years now.
Yeah.
And a number of skeptics have tried to debunk them, and they haven't had any luck. They haven't had any luck.
They can't do it.
Interestingly enough, Rupert Sheldrake gets a little footnote in the new McGilchrist book, and it's a positive commentary. So that was nice to see morphic resonance getting a mention in the new magnum opus from McGilchrist. Anyway, Dr. Iain McGilchrist is someone that I've been promoting for quite a while. And if you've noticed, there's a video I posted not too long ago where McGilchrist talks about the importation of AI-driven social credit systems in China coming into the US.
Do you know about predictive?
No, please tell us about it.
Okay. Well, you know, in China they have this social credit system whereby everything you do is monitored and evaluated, and if you talk to the wrong person or voice the wrong opinion or buy the wrong thing in a store, this counts against you. And if you get enough bad points, you can't actually get a job or take a loan or even move from your town because you can't buy a train ticket. Well, believe it or not, in America there is a private company called Predictim that has developed an algorithm, and these things always start as for your own protection, you know? How everything sinister gets in to make things safer. And this one is about how can you get safer than this? Babysitting. Oh, that really speaks to the core, because everybody wants to protect their child. So there is an algorithm that will tell you whether a babysitter is reliable. And how does it do that? It monitors your Facebook page and your Instagram posts and everything that they can find out about the websites that you visit. And it looks at your face and your facial expressions and movements and records your opinions. And it can't tell the difference between a funny remark, a sarcastic remark, a remark out of context, or anything else, and it creates a score, a mindless score that even the people who created it don't know where it gets the data from, and you, the victim of this, don't know why you're getting a bad score. And that would perhaps not matter very much if it only happened if you were babysitting. But now companies are using predictive data to hire people. So if you've got, like you voiced, an opinion that was controversial, you're marked down as a troublemaker. But a society needs people who are going to be a little bit rebellious.
Right, right, wow. Okay.
So I think it's interesting now that on a number of occasions I've said it to myself and pointed it out to other people in here on this channel that, you know, sometimes McGilchrist sounds like maybe the most academically respected conspiracy theorist in the world. And now after this little dialogue with Mark Vernon, he's talking about AI invading the life with social credit. He's not talking about like a Skynet AI. He's talking about a kind of artificial intelligence that is just used to crunch numbers and produce algorithms that automate and regulate our lives with a series of bureaucratic regulations that then kind of compartmentalize and label and organize society based on a kind of robotic left brain thinking. So the left brain thinking that Iain McGilchrist has spent the better part of 15 years now warning us about has now come alive, and COVID seems to have kicked it off. McGilchrist is there talking about COVID and how COVID restrictions are totalitarian and enslavement-like, and it's a slippery slope. Mark Vernon isn't a fan of that strong of speech and likes to change the subject. So unfortunately, in this clip, we're not going to hear, say, the best from Mark Vernon. I do appreciate him when he's talking about the value of psychotherapy, of Plato and the Greek thinkers, as well as some of his ideas about the Christian movement and the value of spirituality. And I always appreciate what he has to say about Dante and his epic poem, the Commedia. So Mark Vernon is a thinker that's worth talking about, but he spent 2 years shying away from sharing his opinions about COVID, while Dr. McGilchrist is, in comparison, a full-blown conspiracy theorist. And let's not forget that conspiracy theorists, while they may be prone to unsubstantiated speculations and over-exaggerations or overreactions and downright paranoid and completely imaginary thinking at times, many of their concerns are rooted in paradigms that are true. It was the government and the military that made us aware of UFOs in the 50s, and then just this past summer, the government, the Pentagon, released those UAP reports, aerial phenomenon, unidentified aerial phenomenon. So are they flying objects or are they illusions? Because they're aerial phenomenon if they're holograms, but in order to be unidentified flying objects, they'd have to be actual objects that are flying. Government will tell you it was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK, but then if you talk about who killed JFK, people tell you to put the tinfoil hat on. Personally, I don't think anybody shot JFK, not even Zapruder, but that's a different story.
I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you felt that something had gone missing and that life had a rather paradoxical flavour. And it came home to me actually before I came up here, because I had to go to the Apple store and get a fixture for my computer. It was a lovely sunny Sunday, and I didn't want to spend very much time doing it. And I had to go to the local shopping centre. And I thought I'd park near the middle, which seemed like the obvious place to find a store guide so I could zip in and out. but these guys have got you taped. They know that they want you to wander around this place like a lost soul. And it was nowhere near there that I found the store guide. Anyway, I did my business, but as I was doing it, I was thinking, this is very strange. These people are all ambling slowly around this place, and they seem to have absolutely no idea of where they're going, but they're sort of browsing on the thought of consuming something. And they looked a little bit like, in these long corridors of the mall, they looked a little like, it reminded me actually of the old mental hospitals, and the passive patients sort of ambling up and down, looking flat rather than distressed, well fed and watered, and not really sure where they were going. And I thought this contrasted very drastically with the experience of my day job, which is being a psychiatrist. And time and again, people sit down at my desk and tell me how incredibly stressed they are, how fast and how hard they work, what long hours they work, under what pressure they work. And when they have time, they're not sure what it is they're going to do with it.
Iain McGilchrist is worried about social credit systems, AI algorithms being used to implement a kind of quasi-inverted totalitarianism that isn't physically forced on us, but one that we volunteer from because we're afraid of things like a pandemic. So here's McGilchrist. We're not going to hear too much from Vernon because obviously he's afraid to get labeled a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, McGilchrist is kind of quasi or semi-retired up in the Isle of Skye and is kind of academically untouchable and has tenured his reputation as a profound polymath and great thinker, while Mark Vernon is still kind of on the come up. So it's nice to see McGilchrist getting proven right about the divided brain ideas over the past decade, and now his magnum opus seems to be warning us about the world we're unmaking or co-creating as we speak. So here's Dr. Iain McGilchrist, the kind of quasi-conspiracy theorist.
A very serious point that technology and administration work together to a situation where it may be that we can't actually extricate ourselves with dignity or freedom. What I mean by this is that technology is it's neither good nor bad, it's only as good as the people who are using it. But the difficulty is that in the modern world, those who are developing and exploiting the uses of technology are clearly those who are in power because they have either colossal amounts of money or are very high up in government or branches of administration. And who are those people? They're often perfectly decent people, I know, but there's a tendency for them to be interested in the excitements of power and to have, perhaps in cases it's certainly been suggested, and I don't see that there's any reason to doubt it, that there is an excess of both psychopathic and narcissistic tendencies in those who congregate around power. The difficulty with having developed a technology which enables them effectively to enslave the people is that they will do. And it's about that I'm very concerned. Of course, the COVID situation has accelerated this in a number of ways. Very obviously, of course, because the mobile phone has somehow become a passport to being a full citizen, and that your rights as a citizen are controlled by things that you must carry on a phone, and you must have a pass, and it can track where you are, and this is reported, and so on. Now, I don't actually have a functioning mobile phone. I have one for emergencies when I'm traveling, but I don't like to be using it all the time because I think it has a toxic effect on the user. It fragments our attention, it constantly interrupts, it simplifies things, it directs us, and it spies on us. Whether you know or whether people do know enough about what their phone stores, the information that it stores about them, I think people aren't generally aware of how much that is. What do you feel about that, Mark?
Yeah, well, I mean, you use this powerful words in what you say there, like psychopathy, like being enslaved. And I think they're not necessarily inappropriate words, but maybe what you write about helps us to understand how these things can kind of creep up on us, rather than necessarily to be some kind of psychopath, in control, although it's not hard to imagine some parts of the world where that is the case, of course, which we're pretty aware of at the moment as well. But it's more this kind of creep that I think you capture so well. The bureaucracy that in one moment brings a kind of freedom through increased efficiency, that in the next moment loses the end to which it was originally intended, and so becomes an end in itself. And we almost forget, what life can be about. It's that kind of forgetting, mislaying, lacking the imagination that I think is as powerful as, say, the person designing the AI and making a world that suits the AI increasingly, and so excluding part of life that perhaps is the most important part in the process as well. It's these kind of unintended consequences that I think are so fascinating and in a way even more important to identify, because you can't just quickly blame someone else or identify an evil figure. It's rising up from within us if we're not careful, as much as anything else.
Completely right, and that's a point I was proposing to come on to, which is a point that's been made for some time. It was made by Adorno back in the 40s and 50s, that it's not really to do with toxic individuals wanting to have power over us. That's often what's projected. At the moment, there's a general feeling that there's a group of individuals who are going to take over our lives. But very often, they are as much the victims of the process as the rest of us. Indeed, bureaucrats are themselves enmeshed in bureaucracy. It's not as though they're spared this. And once you fetishize a means, which may be administration or technology, to an end, and make the thing matter whatever the end it reaches, then you've completely lost the plot. And that's where we're at the moment. I've been very struck by quite simple things. For example, I gave a talk to my university, Oxford University, about 7 months ago, and I didn't know that they were prepared to pay me for it. That was very nice. And in the past, I would very soon have had a check from the university chest. But in fact, it took 6 or 7 months of me filling in forms, looking at spreadsheets, which had nothing whatever to do with giving a lecture. They were designed for people who might be cleaning the windows around the university, literally. There were 71 categories, I think, but not one of them was giving a lecture, which I thought was the whole point of university. Now, I'm not wanting to, say anything about this experience, except that when I finally contacted the people who were trying to administer this, they said, oh God, it's just a headache for us. It takes up so much of our time. And when you think of how expensive the time of all the people involved in this drama is, and how many useless hours were used up, this is a terrifically wasteful process, at the very least. So I've noticed in the last 2 years that just doing something simple that used to take a 5-minute phone call can now take up to 4 hours on the internet, as something went wrong and then come back later and we need to check something, and they send no, but the code doesn't tally with the code they've got, and so on. And actually, if you live somewhere where there isn't a mobile phone, imagine what your life is like, because you can't validate these codes. So increasingly, things seem to take a very, very long time and be very much less human than they used to be. Another example, I met my son in London, and one of the striking things was because I don't live in London, as you know, I live on a Scottish island, but was to see quite how many places in London where one could have met for a drink or to eat have closed down. I mean, that's one of the sad things about the COVID period. But the ones that were still working were, for reasons I'm sure they would justify on the grounds of this is what COVID brings, required you to order by scanning a QR code. So first of all, if you didn't have a mobile, which I didn't, you were capable of not only of going into a bar or restaurant because you couldn't validate your ID and your immune status, but you had to do this. And my son is very tech savvy. And it took 15 minutes for us to place an order. And in the end, he had to go to the bar and say, look, this process is breaking down. And I remembered, how much of my life I have really enjoyed going with a friend and going into a bar or restaurant, sitting down and talking, and somebody coming to the table and saying, oh, welcome, what can I do for you? And then you'd have a look at it and say, is this good? Yeah, it's very good indeed. It's got this and that and the other. Is it enough for two people? Or what will you do if you can't do that with a mobile phone? And gradually, contact with people is being phased out, of course, because people are expensive. But the machines actually... We value your business, and because we care and all this nonsense actually just covers up a situation in which life is degraded. It's becoming less human, it's becoming more difficult to accomplish any simple task. And at the higher level, you're being monitored, your movements and your health status in a way that we would never have accepted a few years ago. So one of the very important messages for me is we must, all of us, fight back. So we must not rest until all the emergency procedures and rules and regulations that were brought in the early days of COVID are repealed. During the last war, there were various obligations on the population, obviously, and they were enforced by law. But at the end of the war, those were again repealed. Now, I worry that the lust for power and control was not even as exciting as lust. It's a sort of, as you were saying, it's something that everybody's caught up in and can't do anything about even if they want to. But that kind of dynamism of control is such that we won't necessarily see this reverse. It's too useful for some government to have this data. So imagine if there was an authoritarian government in control like the Nazis in Germany in the 1930s. It was possible in those days for people to go around distributing leaflets after dark, putting them in stairwells of blocks of flats and sort of pinning up notices. Nowadays, they wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, imagine trying to conduct some kind of counter government program in China.
Yeah. I mean, look, I know the world that you're talking about. And there is the side of the kind of activism to repeal the laws. I also feel, though, that there's something can be understood here, which I know you'll know about as well. And in fact, as you were talking, a place came to my mind, which was big in your past and has played a big role in my part, which is the Maudsley Hospital, the psychiatric hospital in South London, which we both worked at.
This is Symbols, Patterns, and Gnosis with Jason Bickford. That's me. I produce this channel. For YouTube, I have other creative outlets. This is a non-monetized page, and I am not sponsored, nor do I have any affiliate links from which I benefit from. I am crowdfunded through Patreon. At Patreon, I post essays, exclusive content, lots of downloadable goodies. If you get in there now for as little as $3 a month, even less if you take advantage of the annual discount, you can access previews, art sales, downloadable books, PDFs. You'll see how my mind works. You can get involved in the conversations going on there, meet some interesting and smart people, or you can message me privately. I get back to everybody that reaches out to me there. Again, that's just $3 a month for the lowest tier. You can contribute more if you're in a position to do so. You can also get t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, some downloadable goodies, and posters over at gnosticonpress.com, my Teespring store. I also have an Etsy.com channel under the name of the Gnostic Reclamation, and you can search me, Jason Bickford, by name there as well. And I have fine art prints on wood. I'm going to be updating that shortly, and we will be going into printed material this year in the not too distant future. So that's my commercial, so please support me. I'm an independent artist, and I'm non-mainstream. There isn't really any professional way I can work for someone else in media and express the things that I want to express, because I would be forever canceled and forever fired. So support me if you resonate with my content and want to help me continue to grow this channel and improve the quality of this material. So I'll be trying new formats, and in the not too distant future I'll be updating some gear. And that's courtesy of the city of Broomfield and the lawsuit settlement they'll be offering me in the not too distant future. And I'll do an upload video on that, so good things to come. So thanks for supporting the channel, even if it's just hitting the like to help the algorithm spread my video and increase the possibility that this will be recommended to someone else. So thanks for that, and now back to the message.